Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call to order our committee meeting, operations committee meeting and special board meeting for Marin Water on November 17th, 2023. Terry, if we could have a roll call vote, please.
Yes, good morning. Director Matt Sampson.
Here.
Director Monty Schmidt. Director Jed Smith.
Here.
Vice Chair Ranjiv Kush.
Here.
And Chair Larry Russell.
The next item is adoption of our agenda. If we could have do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Terry, are there any comments, public comments on the agenda?
On the agenda, there are none.
If we could have a vote then.
Yes. Director Sampson.
Yes.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Kush.
Aye. Do we have any public comments on items that are not on the agenda?
Yes, we do. We have one. Mr. Phil Sauter.
Good morning. I'd like to apologize for comments that I made a couple days ago at the meeting. I had indicated that we had not really been looking much at conservation about as of a year ago, and I went back and checked my notes, and it's actually was about 2 years ago that we had not yet elevated conservation to one of the strategic water supplies. And as of a year ago, we've definitely been looking at conservation very directly and effectively, I think. So apologies to staff, and I'll try to do a better job of getting my dates in order from now on. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Great. Okay. Then we'll move on to our regular items. The first is the approval of our minutes from the Operation Committee meeting and special board meeting on October 20th, 2023. Do we have a motion to approve our previous meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second. If we could have a vote, please, Terry.
Yes. Director Sampson.
Yes.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
Vice Chair Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
And then next item, 4B, is an update on our flyer flow improvement program. Alex, looks like you'll be
Yes, good
reading
morning,
that.
directors. I'm Alex Naya, Acting Director of Engineer. This morning we have Dion Mokhtari, Assistant Engineer, who will be presenting the Redwood Drive Pipeline Replacement Project, which is a component of the district's fire flow improvement program. Go ahead, Dion.
Good morning, directors. I'm Dion Mokhtari, Assistant Engineer in Design. This morning, I'm here to present the Fire Flow Improvement Program Redwood Drive Pipeline Replacement Project. This project is located along Conifer Way, Park Road, Redwood Drive, and Taylor Avenue, all within the unincorporated community of Woodacre. This project will install approximately 4,300 feet of 6-inch and 4-inch pipes, along with all appurtenances to replace the old, leak-prone, undersized fire flow deficient piping installed as early as 1913 as part of the district's fire flow improvement program. This project presented an opportunity to collaborate with Marin County and their up-and-coming pavement project, aiming to minimize the district's paving needs and mitigate the impact on nearby residents. My engineer's estimate for this project is $1,250,000. The district will advertise this project. If bid documents are acceptable, staff will make a recommendation at future regularly scheduled board meetings for contract award. The staff recommended action is for review and referral to the board with operations committee's recommendation to proceed with the project. That is all for this item, and I truly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any board comments or questions? Monty, starting with you.
Sure. When would the project likely be constructed and completed?
Once we advertise it, it's probably starting early next year, after all the contract documents are processed.
Yeah,
and
it goes through a normal time process. So do you think completed by the summer?
Just hopefully that's about we have the completion date here estimated at May 3rd, 2024.
I'm sure the community out there will appreciate having greater fire flow ahead of the dry season. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Was that figure in our budget more or less than we had expected before? Is this new budget item or is this something that we were expecting?
You mean as far as the project itself? It's
Yes.
been identified in the fire flow master plan. So it's the list of plans or projects have already been identified by the fire department, and we're just following down the list. So it's already been identified
In our budget?
in the budget. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
In the fire flow budget. Correct.
In terms of an annual budget in the fire flow budget, what percentage is this pipe or this project?
It's about a quarter. We have
Quarter of an
a
annual
yearly
budget?
budget of $4.5 million. So this is represents about a quarter of the budget.
And then at 4,300 feet, that's a little bit less than a mile. And with the cost a little bit, lower than $2 million a mile for pipeline that we're hearing quite a bit. What were some of the savings that were realized from this project?
Trench restoration and coordination with the county that reduces and minimizes the amount of paving we have to do with it.
Great. Yep. That's good to hear. Thank you.
And I just wanted to clarify, the fire flow budget is funded through an assessment on properties. So that is independent of our water sales revenues.
That is correct. That is
Yeah,
correct.
and they pay us twice a year from the county, so we get a check for 2.25 million twice a year. As the tax payments are made, basically.
Great. Thank you. Larry, I know you're just coming in, but any other thoughts or
No,
comments on this? Okay.
That is very old pipe. So we're definitely glad to get this out of the system.
Yeah, I mean, it's
It's-
just interesting that some pipe, depending where it is, and pressures last well beyond expected life, while other pipe does the opposite. So it's really case specific condition assessment, but it is interesting.
And material specific,
In material, galvanized pipe for over 100
a
years.
different animal than
Yeah.
cast iron. No way.
Mhm.
Okay, any public comment?
There are none.
Okay,
We need a motion to,
A motion, we refer this to the
We-
board.
Great. Yeah,
Second.
a motion and a second is sufficient. Thank you.
no vote.
Second, if we don't have it.
Okay, recycled water?
You want to drive? Okay, you've set a moment here while we get set up with our presentation.
Just go to share and it's already up.
Woohoo. All right. Good morning, Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director. So we have for you this morning, pretty comprehensive review and look at recycled water, which is something that, I mean, we have been looking at for a very long time at the district. And I think you'll see from the presentation, we cover not just what's happening in Marin in general with our existing purple pipe water system and how we go about this, not on. How we go about expanding that system to looking at specific phases of expansion over time, to looking pulling out specific projects, just different ways for us to look at the economics and see how we can move forward with recycled water. In addition to which, beyond purple pipe, we're going to look at the different options for potable reuse, which of course is much in the news of late, and very exciting things are happening in California in that regard. So it's a great time for us to give you an update on this and look forward to a good discussion. So our existing recycled water system, you may know, I think the first recycled water was produced in 1976 as part of that drought. There was a little pilot program and they were testing it up over at Las Colinas, and our customers found out and they kept driving up and asking for water because it was pretty dire times. At that time, the district, didn't have a lot of experience. Nobody did really with recycled water. And, over at that location at Las Galinas, there was it was the site of an old Nike missile system, and they had 3 vaults up there. And so as a cost saving measure, the district elected to line those vaults with HDPE. And it was kind of a neat story of sort of swords to plowshares, using old military infrastructure to support, kind of a good use for our citizenry. Those tanks have since been replaced by a 4 million gallon dedicated purpose tank for chlorine contact and storage of recycled water. And we provide today about 700 acre feet per year of water to our customers. The distribution system is largely around the Terra Linda area. It's about 25 miles of pipe and a couple of pump stations and 2 storage tanks. There's 1 million gallons of storage out in the system, and that tank I talked about before is about 1.7 million gallons of storage there. So we got decent storage for the system, and this is not an easy place for purple pipe projects. It never really has been. We don't have the big sort of anchor tenants, Chevrons and, server farms and things like that that could really use a lot of water. And those big demands help offset the capital costs that we'll talk about in a minute. So we've pioneered lots of different uses, from commercial laundries to the first cooling towers to use recycled water to as far as I know, the first condominium, certainly on the West Coast, to use recycled water, and that's at the 33 San Pablo facility. So a lot of kind of leading edge,
And the Ambassador Suites.
and some parts of that area as well. Yeah. So it's been a very creative process for us to drive the demand up to what you see even here today. So in addition to our distribution network of pipelines, we also have a truck hauling program. And this is a process where we train and license truck haulers to use recycled water, and they go pick it up. As you can see in the picture here, that's over by the Civic Center. And we've got some hydrants out that way, and they can fill up their trucks. The 7 million gallons that we see annually here, notice it's carefully phrased as up to. That reflects a drought year usage for us. It's about 20 acre feet or so, to give you kind of context. Normal year, probably, less than half of that, I would say, somewhere in that range. And the uses you can see there for dust control, sewer flushing, and so on.
Hey, Paul, on this program, do we have mandatory truck hauling for commercial customers?
We do not have mandatory truck hauling, but I think at the end of the last drought, some uses, sort of dust control and so on, they may have been kept in the recycled water area. So I think a lot of contractors have been using recycled water where they can. It's obviously not available everywhere, and there can be some hardship applications and variances.
So just during the drought, we implement that, or?
Well, so dust control and certain aspects the state retained after the drought. So there are some uses that have been added.
Yeah.
But it's not, a huge volume for us. So.
Okay. I have heard from some customers that the expense of it, especially going from Southern Marin up to Terra Linda, using gas, hiring people, it may have other environmental and cost impacts. But you're saying that's a state?
I think some of the uses,
regulation?
I'd have to review them, Director Smith, as to what exactly the state retained after the last drought.
Okay.
Yeah. So in addition to our commercial program, we have a residential fill program that we sort of broke out in the drought. It's really a drought response tool for us. This was all designed and installed by staff with permitting and assistance from the regional boards. Again, you can see here in 2021, 2022, it's about an acre foot of usage, and you can see the number of trips there. We had most of years, there are about 100 customers that are responsible for all of these trips in each of the year. We have far more, licenses or permits that we issued to be able to pull this water, but sort of a regular customer base of around 100 or so folks.
And Paul, that site requires staff to be there to actually
Yes.
maintain it or use it.
Yeah, so staff is there sort of for traffic control setup, and of course, it's a bit impactful for the county to, and we close down, for example, during the fairs and things like that. So it's designed to be taken away, and we can, store it and put it back when we need to. But it was certainly very popular. So that's kind of a snapshot of the system. We got distribution, piping, truck hauling programs, and we're always asking ourselves, okay, how do we increase the use of recycled water in our service area? And I think about it in terms of three buckets. One is adding new customers to the existing system. So that pipeline network in Terra Linda, as we hear about customers that have a project, maybe they already have irrigation of recycled water, on their property, and they're adding some toilets or something, and it's an opportune moment for them to start flushing toilets with recycled water. The other way is you can think about expanding that existing system, so moving that purple pipe further out into the neighborhoods. And then the last way is just, all of those first two ways are essentially leveraging the existing system. The third way would be to start thinking about creating a whole new recycled water system from a different source. So we've looked at options from Central Marin Sanitation Agency, and of course from the Sewerage Agency of Southern Marin, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
I think you should probably either refer to or distribute to the board the map that shows the 9 areas for recycled water.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're familiar with it or not. It's the same map that existed when I first joined the board in 2004, of which one zone is done, the one in Central San Rafael and the Civic Center and that.
Yeah, we do have that coming up in a
Good.
moment, as we talk about the next step, which was sort of a larger phased approach to expanding the recycled water system. So the types of projects, just a smattering of them here that I was talking about, infill type projects, right? Terra Linda High School, they already irrigated with recycled water. They're adding some toilets. It's just a good moment for them to start doing that. And then there are a few others listed here. So as I mentioned, we feel like we know our recycled water system fairly well. We've looked at it continuously, at least in my tenure here, which is about reflected by these studies. The first one, as Director Russell was talking about, was in 2000. And more recently, you can see there, we've taken a pretty good look at different options for recycled water in the system. Most recently as part of the, in 2022 and 2023, as part of the MMWD CMSA DPR study, and then the Strategic Water Supply Assessment as well.
FYI, Steve Moore was pushing on me the other day. I had lunch with him and we were talking about the CMSA stuff. So they're hot to trot.
So General Manager Horenstein was recently visiting over at CMSA and gave them a review similar to this, but maybe not quite as detailed. As we look at thinking about increasing recycled water use in the area, we've, as Chair Russell indicated, this map, the purple section up there, that's our existing system. It's already built out. And these other phases, these expansion phases, there are actually 21 of them that they went through. So each a discrete phase where they went through, looked at the alignment for pipe, size of pipe, number of customers, demand on that particular segment of pipe. And those all get kind of added up and collated into the table that you see below. And sort of broken out into 1 through 10 and 11 through 21 in terms of phases. And you can see the challenges, they're long pipelines for us and fairly high costs. And when you don't have those big anchor tenants, it's difficult to drive the unit cost to sort of comparable or supportable numbers. And we'll see that as a common theme for our purple pipe projects.
Paul, just on that point of anchor tenants, would San Quentin then be the largest potential user of recycled water as a single customer?
Generally, the golf courses use a bit more. So Peacock Gap would actually have the largest use. And you'll see both of those are fairly close in a minute. We'll take a look at some of those just kind of at a high level.
Paul, one quick follow-up. Would you consider an anchor tenant being like the Northgate development going in for the dual plumbing, or is that not enough use to meet a threshold for that?
It's a good question. Given that the pipe network is already there, there's a good chance that that project would be a pretty good candidate project to add as an infill. It really would depend on how many units, the capacity of our pipeline network around that area. But it's a fairly robust pipeline network, so
It wouldn't be an anchor tenant.
yeah, it would just be a good infill project.
Generally around the state, kind of anchor tenants are refineries, for example, that, you know, are using 5 MGD of one pass cooling water, and it pays to bring recycled water there, and then you hook up others along the way. That's kind of the rough concept. Or, you know, a few large golf courses over in an area, and you bring a pipe and you get your payback on that and tie in others along the way. In a bedroom community, of course, that's challenged.
If you'll recall, when we were looking at bringing the pipeline across the bridge, there's excess water at Richmond Refinery, Chevron Refinery, excess fresh water, because East Bay Mud built in San Pablo a treatment plant to treat the San Pablo sewage to send to Chevron. So that's the kind of thing Ben's talking about. If you haven't seen it, it's worth going, take a look at it. It's on the road, the back road to the freeway out of Point Richmond. I can't think what it's called right, Richmond Parkway. And it's an interesting plan. It's quite a sophisticated process to do that.
Yeah, it would be super helpful, though I'm not sure we get a lot of support for a refinery in our service area. But for recycled water purposes, it would be fantastic. So phased approaches is sort of large system expansion approaches. Economics are challenging for us in terms of the unit cost. So we pulled out, you know, you look for maybe are there good projects? Are there single projects that we could really focus in on and change those economics for us? And so we over the years, we've pulled out a number of these, and there's a table of a few of the more common ones with the higher, quite frankly, per acre foot uses for these. And you can see again, Peacock Gap is the golf course with the highest demand offset, and it has the most favorable unit cost, still relatively high for us.
Paul, on the annual cost, I'm assuming that includes some amortization of the capital investment as well as the ongoing operational requirements and then the pumping costs.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's an important one as we look at, you know, comparing projects to projects. It's typically a 30-year lifespan on and you know, select your percentage. I think at the moment, these are reflecting a 3.75%, which may be a bit optimistic, but these are 30-year projects. So you may have the opportunity to refinance them and so on. It does include that capital amortization and of course an O&M costs that get added together and then the annual water demand. And that's how we kind of try to normalize these unit costs.
And what would we extend at Lucas Valley? Where would it go? Just down the road, I understand that, but to who?
Well, I think there's some areas for irrigation down in that area. Yeah.
Because when Lucas wanted to build Grady Ranch out, it was quite a task. Can we extend the recycled outside of our service zone?
I think we'd need to do some analysis on that. Most likely it's going to fall in that providing water outside of your service zone area. So that there are a few boxes that we would need to check before.
Yeah, because the district ends pretty close up Lucas Valley.
Yeah.
As I recall.
Yeah.
We don't serve much out in there.
Yeah. So project by project basis, we've looked at pulling those out. And then each of those projects represent, as I said earlier, you know, we look at the project, think about different alignments to see if there are ways for us to capture different volumes of water to help us offset the costs. And so the shortest route, this is Peacock Gap going to the golf course, the shortest route has maybe the least demand, right? You're going down Point San Pedro Road. There's just not a lot of use there, but it's the shortest route. So how did that compare? In the end, the engineering team looked at the orange route as the south route, we call it, which goes through San Rafael because we can pick up the most water. I think there's less environmental challenges along that way as well, because putting the pipeline out on North San Pedro Road could be problematic for us as well in that area. So there are a lot of things that go into each of these project considerations. And the economics you can see here, we've talked about that already.
Did we get around the Native American burial issues in China Camp?
No. don't
So
think
they still
that's-
want that causeway.
Last I as far as I know, that was their intent, was they're looking eventually to make that roadway, lift it out of the marsh so that the
Yeah.
marsh can connect on both sides. of the
Especially
road.
if we pay for it.
So then looking at, creating a new recycled water system using a new source, so from CMSA or from the Sewage Agency of Southern Marin down there in Sycamore and in Mill Valley. And here's the San Quentin project, Director Cush, that came out of that CMSA feasibility study. It's about 150 acre feet of water, the updated capital costs. I think the study was done in 2016 for that one. The SASM was maybe the year before, 2014, something like that. And you can see the unit costs there. So they're still relatively high, though these start to become, if you could think about a grant of 50% or more, if we could get some state grants, some federal funding, and maybe you can start to see economic unit costs coming into kind of comparable with other water supply options.
But that's not DPR, right? That's
No.
just supplying the
This is
recycled.
just for toilet. This would be toilet flushing essentially at San Quentin,
Yeah.
and similar irrigation on the SASM side.
And you can imagine the capital cost of getting in to do that retrofit inside the prison. It's very difficult. There also are something like 6 houses on the entrance road to San Quentin that we serve. I remember when I pushed real hard on the DPR side of providing the prison, 2 things that stuck in my mind. One, those 6 houses didn't want to be on the DPR. They wanted to continue with their service. That was something that could be worked out. The second one was that I was assured that the district could be sued by the prisoners union over the implementation of DPR to the prison. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of, is that really a problem? It's a fact, but I don't know if there's any standing to fight it or not. I know when Contra Costa did it, Shell had a duck, literal duck. I mean, they came from Amsterdam into Concord Airport in a jet to fight with Contra Costa Water over getting reclaimed water to the refinery. So, there's still resistance to that issue.
Yeah, and we'll get to those sort of comments later on. Lucy will be talking about the potable reuse options in a moment here. We're almost done, I think, with the Purple Pipe review.
But I think Larry's comment highlights the importance of education of our community, and we should get ahead of it. So the more we can let people know that we have it, that it works, it's treated clean water, it's as good as any.
Better, actually.
I would say that we should start fighting that and not let that hold us up. So let's educate people and make that a part of our plan.
So bringing it all together, this is just a summary table looking at the projects, and it just sort of drives home the challenging economics essentially for us. Driven largely.
Sorry, quick question on SASM. So they did used to irrigate Friends Field and Bayfront Park, and what happened? Why is that not happening now?
I believe their recycled water plant may have exceeded its useful life. And it was run, I think, by this, SASM is kind of an odd agency, sort of run by the city, but operated as a slightly different entity. So their funding is tied to the city, and the city didn't want to, I think, upgrade the treatment facilities there.
And so is this $4.3 million?
This would
understanding the cost to upgrade that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we've worked with the city on that? That's
We worked with the agency, with SASM on that.
SASM.
Yeah, it was a joint feasibility study.
okay, great.
Looked at back in 2014. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a plant. Have you been there?
Yeah.
Okay, because it's a little rough, that plant.
They're doing a fair bit of work out there, I think.
Yeah.
So recycled water, purple pipe, as Director Smith was saying, it's a great drought-proof supply of water. There's no getting around that. It is just in our area challenging to find the usage volumes to support those capital costs, but that doesn't mean, as you saw from all the studies and all the work that we've done, we don't ever stop looking for those opportunities. And as we note, the cost of implementing any new recycled water options, purple pipe specifically, just have in the back of our mind that as we add that second distribution system, we're building in an infrastructure for ourselves that we're going to need to maintain in the future. So it's not an overriding consideration, were the economics favorable and so on, then we would of course move forward. And that's, our sort of, at the moment, we're really looking for grants to help us support those projects. And furthermore, the other thing that we'd like to do, which Lucy's going to take us through now, is looking at potable reuse options. Is that a better fit for us?
Good morning, Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager. So as Paul has mentioned, we wanted to explore a little further potable reuse. So far, we've talked a lot about non-potable, so irrigation and toilet flushing. And much is changing in the industry with regulations coming out in the state of California and across the nation. So it's always good to stay in the industry and understand where everybody else is, as long as well as what our potential projects are. So that's what we'll be going through. First, starting with thinking about indirect potable reuse. It's one of the first potable reuse options that's been regulated by California, and it is this idea of having recycled or purified water with an environmental buffer. So whether it's putting it in groundwater or putting it in surface water, a reservoir for a time of period, so retaining it for a period of time or diluting it for a period of time. That's kind of this process of indirect potable reuse. And that's really the difference between later what we'll talk about with direct potable reuse. And what we find with most agencies that do IPR is typically if they're using groundwater recharge, it's an agency that's already using groundwater for municipal purposes. So it's groundwater is a source of supply that they use and give out to their customers. As I mentioned, California has already started regulating IPR. It started, I think, about in 2016, and we wanted to bring up the treatment requirements and what those are. So with the pathogen control that is required in order to take this wastewater and treat it to then put it in a groundwater or surface water, it's up to a 12 log, 10 log, 10 log reduction, which to those not in the water industry, that may be speaking very jargony, but we tried to put a little bit of a key on the side in the blue. So 1 log would be 90%, 2 log 99%. And so you can imagine 12 log reduction would be quite a bit of treatment required in order to get it through that first process and then put it in groundwater.
I think it's more useful, Lucy, to talk about the unit processes and what the treatment credits are. Like, as I recall, something like filters are like 3 credits and RO is like 6.
It depends on the type of treatment. So typically you see that there's you may have RO, you may have UV, there may be ozone, and each of those can get up to, say, 3 logs. And as I've noted here, there's no more than 6 log credits that can go for any one of those treatment trains. And then in addition to this treatment that happens at the advanced water purification facility, either the water goes to a groundwater basin or a surface water and is required to meet a number of other requirements, dilution, depending on what the project is. So it's very dependent on the agency and what their resources are around them. And then they're also required to have a source control program and online monitoring.
Lucy, the being able to measure a 12 log reduction or a 10 log reduction is, I'm not sure how that's done. Would the onus on doing that be placed on the manufacturers of the equipment or on the suppliers?
Yes, if you want.
No, go ahead.
So these treatment techniques essentially are given these removal credits, the log removals. They're sort of assigned by
The health department.
state and the health department, but you still are going to need to go through a trial process where you prove it. So if you decide in your design you're going to use, microfilters, RO, and UV peroxide to do your treatment process, you're still going to need to prove those log removals. It's really quite a thing. And, I was trying to think of a way that we could all like understand how low we're talking about. And you'll see in the next discussion, we see it's even lower. But it's something on the order of a grain of salt in a railroad car full of sugar. That may only be 9 logs.
Larry, it's being able to measure that sort of thing now. That's going to be a business opportunity for somebody.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're starting off with millions of them or billions of them. It means zero. That's practically what they're saying is you can have none. Now, what's funny about all this is between Sacramento and Contra Costa Water, there are 32 sewage discharges into the Sacramento River. Unregulated other than sewage regulations. There's no drinking water regulations to those guys. So they can puke out Giardia at 10,000, 100,000, 1 million cells per cc. No regulation. The water, Contra Costa Water has to meet 1. And, this is the irrationality of all this, that you allow 32 cities to discharge into the water without control. And then you have all this, in order to do this. So this is being done every day at Contra Costa Water or at Locke or any of those little towns along the way, south of.
Or the Mississippi River.
Or the Mississippi.
Anywhere, right? IPR has been going on for as long as there's been humans.
Has been and is going.
And is going on, right? In the Mississippi River, they say the water's been in and out of an individual over 20 times in New Orleans by the time you tap the water without these sort of regulations, as Larry's saying. Because it just gets pulled. So it is water's water. And we've been actually thinking of it that way forever. Yet now it's kind of getting formalized. And part of it are these regulations overreaching? And as we think about the future, will the costs come down over time, which is an interesting way potentially to think about this.
They probably have anti-backsliding built into them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't surprise me. I think one of just to put things in perspective, the Mississippi River total volume is used 3 times between the headwaters and New Orleans. Total volume 3 times. Now, mostly cooling, but it's still a big flow. When I was a teaching assistant at Cal, one of the questions that we asked was, how many molecules of Julius Caesar's urine are in your glass of water? And that may seem, I guarantee you will be shocked at the number. It's something like 10,000. I don't remember the exactly. So that means that Julius Caesar drank the water, urinated, and got rid of it. And there's still 10,000 molecules that potentially passed through him in your cup of water.
Adrian just texted me and said, you're not allowed to come to the outreach.
Oh, you don't want to hear science, huh?
But Lucy was just at a conference reflecting on, and mentioned to me that there were folks from out of state reflecting on some of the California. I don't know if you want to share just that.
Just on the differences, California is the first primarily with most technologies to come forward and then lead the way in the country and then across the world. And at least when it comes to DPR, which we'll talk about later, you'll see that even these reduction values need to be much higher. And it's a factor of safety that they've incorporated in, but they don't know over time how it will change. And it's really just, Texas, these other states look at it and we are still 4 or 5 logs higher in California than other states. And it's really just it'll be interesting to see over the coming years how it adapts, how the criteria adapts, and how some of these regulations kind of harden and become the way forward.
Putting that in perspective, what she's saying is that in California, you would basically, to meet these standards, need to put 2 ROs in series. So the first one works hard, the second one doesn't do anything. He just sits there. But that's what this kind of numbers mean in terms of redundancy.
Is it fair to say that the water sector has always been or often been inhibited due to inflexible regulations or overarching regulations? And I mean, I've seen that in other areas, and this seems like another potential area where regulations are really going to slow down
It'd be a great
this progress.
Great discussion on that alone. But the water industry over the years has prided itself on sort of a common sense approach. It's one of the few areas where you really see, for example, MCLs in water quality, maximum contaminant levels, are a risk-based analysis. And that's unusual. I mean, generally speaking, and why in the wastewater world, and Ben can speak to this, for example, the California Toxics Rule, which, governs discharges to the environment, the detection levels in those constituents are far, far lower than what you might find in drinking water. And there's a practical reason behind all of that, because if we said our water had to be absolutely pure before we could drink it, there wouldn't be any to drink. So there's kind of been in the water industry, this practical approach to water treatment.
And there's kind of a yin and yang to that, right? So water regulations take into account kind of practicality and finances. Clean Water Act does not, just takes into account what number it needs to be, period, under strict liability. So yeah, 2 very different models. And this is different, and from a practitioner makes more sense. On the flip side, because dollars and practicality are incorporated into it, at times with things like DPR, you can get pushed back that it's not just about health and safety, it includes these other considerations. So it's a complicated kind of paradigm there.
Yeah, I mean, just realistically, the TMDL issues are far stricter than drinking water standards for aquatic toxicity.
Yeah, in fact, we think about IPR putting this water in one of our lakes, and think about potential Clean Water Act requirements on releases that could be the toughest issue to deal with. It is very interesting.
So thank you for that segue. So looking at a project, taking those regulations and how we would apply IPR to a project in Marin, a conceptual project, we've looked at, we would use an environmental buffer such as our reservoirs, so moving the water up to Kent Lake. The effluent, the wastewater would first be collected from the 3 different wastewater treatment plants. So from Las Colinas, from SASM and CMSA, in order to get the most amount of volume, and bring it together, treat it to the standards that we just discussed, and then convey it over 28 miles out to Kent Lake. And that would also, from what we can tell, require about 4 pump stations to get it up to the elevation. The reason for Kent Lake is the size of Kent Lake. So dilution, we'd hit the dilution, and then it also, we would have enough retention time at Kent Lake. And so with that, we'd expect around 7,800 acre feet per year. And you can see the capital cost is quite high for that. And that's a mix of both the treatment and the capital cost of putting in new pipeline to get it out to Kent. And then we've also noted for continuous and intermittent operations. So many of the treatment trains that are involved in IPR and DPR involve membranes, which require more or less continuous operation. It's hard to take them on and offline. And so we've incorporated, if we were to add supply, we're thinking about a drought, we're thinking about climate change. And so we've backed off to maybe what would it look like if we operated it only intermittently, so once every 3 years. And so the cost, you can see, would be much higher if we were to operate it as a supplemental supply in that way.
This is one of the most important kind of considerations or obstacles in a way as we think about IPR, DPR, very similar to desalination, that we need supplemental water, say once every 3 or 4 years. These systems inherently, as Lucy noted, because of the membranes, really require continuous operation. So we'd be operating today or a month from now when we're full. And it's really a very, as you can see, it's a game changer because the operating costs are so significant in terms of power, chemicals, other things for these type of facilities.
Ben, that's an interesting concept, how we'd only need it once every 3 or 4 years. It'd be interesting to see if we did run it continuously, would that even it out, even the curve out, and actually not require us to look at intermittently, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what it's saying.
So for continuous running, then we wouldn't need,
Yeah,
Right,
that's
okay.
the problem, right? It's 3 times what we're paying now.
right, but we're not left with an intermittent demand during a drought period at that point, because we'd have a continuous flow in addition to what we have now, additional supply moving forward. So it'd be interesting to look at those numbers.
But a lot of it would go over the weir, over the spillway, because the rain's going to come and the reservoir's going to fill up. And so if you've got your reclaimed water in there with the other water, when it's raining, they're all going over the spillway.
Yeah, but the purpose of this is not for when we have extra water. The purpose is when we are out of water. And then what's the cost then, right? Then if there's no other options, this is the drought resistant, drought proof option, right? So then $4,500 an acre foot becomes super attractive because we don't have anything else, right? So
Yeah, but it's 13,000.
no, if you're doing it continuously, then you can just have it. It's just expensive. What's the price of insurance is a way to look at it. And can we incrementally make steps in that process, which I think you're getting to, or not, right? Rather than just
Right. I mean, it's the risk balance that you're talking about there. And when we step back from just looking at recycled water, and we need to look at all our other options, which the board is doing. And this is one component of that.
I think there's one thing that you have to keep in mind here, that Henry Ungerth, who was the state sanitary engineer for years and years and years, had the philosophy, which is actually the philosophy that you termed as overreaching, but what it really is based on this, which is very simple. Use the highest quality water for the highest quality need. That is what's driving the health department. So they're saying, don't use your clean, as Phil Sauter has been saying, don't use your fresh water when you can use recycle, or Matt's been saying. That's all true. The problem is it's the getting it there. That's where the hard part comes.
So this table is a bit overwhelming, but it's a look at, I know Terry doesn't know where to put. This is a look at projects that are planned or operational across the state. So within California for IPR, looking at both Northern California and Southern California. Orange County groundwater replenishment system's been operating since 1976 and is just recently expanded to 130 MGD. And then you can see that there's a couple other agencies here, San Diego and Pure Water Southern California, which is Met Water. And they've got plans to start using IPR in the near future. And that's primarily to offset from using the Colorado River. And so you can see here kind of the magnitude of the capacities that some of these agencies are looking at with 100 MGD for Pure Water Southern California, and then also kind of the cost that's associated with it. But some are already operational, like the Pure Water Monterey. They're doing a kind of a seawater intrusion project. So that was a little bit more urgent in getting it going. And then the other bigger agencies are still in the planning and design process.
Yeah, as it's Orange County, I don't think it's really fair to characterize it as an expansion. It's a change in purpose, because originally it was put in to hold the salt water back from the wells, but they just sort of didn't explain to people that 90% of the water, the reclaimed water, was going into the drinking water and 10% was going into the holding back the salt water. They just sort of skipped over that until the NDMA issues hit. But that's a real change in Orange County, because Water Factor 21 is the first one, which is to produce the barrier. Then they're into the groundwater reclaim thing, which is up the road.
A different comment. Lucy, this is really helpful. Thank you for illustrating that the different water agencies that are investing in this area. It'd be really great to see what their cost per acre foot is on these projects to understand where at what price point they're investing in this. And there's more that goes into it because you have to know what's their alternative. You know, we are comparing our water supply alternatives to our costs to water from Sonoma. That's our benchmark in for a variety of reasons. So it'd be great to know what what their cost per acre foot is, and if there's some way to understand is that really their best alternative or other factors.
Yeah, it's a good comment. And as I was looking through a lot of these projects, and I'll say that these are only a handful, of course, excuse me, of projects across California. There's a number of more that are doing IPR. The cost per acre foot is rapidly changing, along with the cost. So with COVID, many of the capital costs are changing very quickly. And so if any of these are planned out in the next 10 years, I think we'll see the cost per acre foot change along with ours as well. But it's always adapting over time.
Recall that San Diego gets 10% of their water from desal, doubled their water bills.
Yeah, I mean, I know that over time the costs will change. I can't tell which way it's cutting because the technology might make it cheaper, but obviously inflation and cost of infrastructure is going up. So anyway, that's maybe just a comment of stare into the crystal ball.
So taking a closer look at one of the projects is Pure Water Southern California, which is basically Met Water and then combined working with LA County sanitation districts. So it's one of when it gets in place and in the planning phase even, it's really considered one of the largest reuse projects in the world. And at full scale, they expect about 150 MGD for an advanced water plant, and that would be in the south. So the map's a little bit harder to see up here, but that's in the south southwest portion. And then the blue line is basically a conveyance. So that would be a pipeline up to their groundwater basins. And they are planning for 60 miles of dedicated conveyance to move the water after the advanced plant up to the groundwater basins. What's interesting about this project as well is that they're incorporating a flexible design for DPR. So there's some surface water some surface water reservoirs that are just nearby. They're showing 25 MGD to the kind of right. So they're kind of incorporating that into their planning. Right now, they're doing a pilot plant, and final design is expected to start in the next couple of years, with startup and testing in 2032. So still very much kind of in the planning phase right now. So bringing it to IPR and thinking about the projects and also our projects, we just wanted to note that it's a significant capital investment. So not only in the treatment, but also in the conveyance, moving the water to another location for that environmental buffer. And then there's always constituents and concern. We talked about the treatment requirements, but there's always trace contaminants that, we'll know more over time on how those are removed, as well as continuous operations, as we talked about. So bringing that into the planning phase of, how much is the cost per acre foot, depending on how often we use the plant. And so segueing now into looking at DPR. DPR is our next section. Would that be a better fit given kind of some of these challenges and opportunities? So DPR, it also has kind of two categories to it. There's the raw water augmentation, which I've been calling IPR light. It's basically, they still put it in a environmental buffer, but it's for not the same amount of time as required in IPR. And then treated water augmentation is much more, it's directly into the public water system. So that's more what we've considered historically as DPR. At least when I've heard the term DPR, I think of it kind of pipe to pipe. And so that's what treated water augmentation is. And then an update on the regulatory framework that's being developed. It's been underway for over 13 years. in California specifically. And there was just a public hearing in September that was interesting to listen to and hear kind of some of these bigger agencies that we just talked about, really putting forth the reasons behind moving off Colorado water and moving towards these regulations and having the availability of more drought-proof supply. And so the targeted adoption date of those regulations is the end of this year. And then what they expect is that the actual effective date will be the middle of next year.
I think it's important, though, to realize how we got to this. And that is that the health department was holding up red flags going, you can't go there, you can't go there, you can't go there. So finally, Water Reuse Association said, hey, what's the problem? They said, well, we need these studies and these studies and these studies. Okay. So Water Reuse went out to agencies like ours. We contributed to that. We gave money to do the studies to eliminate the roadblocks from the health department. So basically, that's what's coming right now is all of these are done. And now they're going to have to basically go or get off the pot. So, that's what this is all about. And it's funded by, like I say, by water agencies like us, directly funded this work to stop the questions from the health department. Said, no more questions. Tell us what you need. Here they are. Here's all the studies. And, we've answered all the questions you have. So now what? And this is when it's going to be very interesting the next 6 months.
Yeah. Very exciting time.
So then looking at the treatment requirements for now DPR, you'll see that it's a little bit more stringent. So it's 20, 14, 15 for the removal of viruses and pathogens, and also required to have a number of treatment processes, treatment trains. So you'll see kind of an example that's from from our recent study with CMSA doing a DPR study. So you'll see that that's kind of an example of what a treatment train would look like with ozone and BAC and ultrafiltration. And then also, in addition to some of the requirements we saw with IPR, they're also required to have 24 months of monthly feed water monitoring prior to operations.
So just something popped in my mind that we didn't have on the slides. So with all of those really complex treatment trains, the industry is struggling, right? One thing we need to wrestle with is operations. Who's going to operate? Our licensed operators are wastewater and sort of standard drinking water. And they're, creating this more technical hybrid license for operations, but we're in sort of this
operations of these
these types of facilities. So it's sort of at the moment it's sort of nascent and developing in terms of licensing for folk. How many people have those licenses and can operate these facilities? Pretty limited at the moment.
And the consequences are obvious. That if it breaks down,
right,
how do you know? We got real high tech things like conductivity, right? If we see a breakthrough of the RO, the conductivity goes up. Oh, but long before that, the bacteria got through. So that's the tricky part of this, especially if you're direct piped.
Well, even direct pipe will have engineered storage. And then the smaller the storage, the greater the frequencies of monitoring. Engineering, pretty good.
But when you get biological
experience is lacking,
and biological testing takes time. It's not like shoving it in a machine and you get an answer.
Right.
You got to grow them and things like that. So there's days involved, and they'll adjust, as you said, into the storage that lag to the point they can. But what about Christmas and what about New Year's and what about those issues? It's tricky to have an ongoing full-time everything running all the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, just in addition to the operational requirements, the safety monitoring, the energy requirements for that type of treatment are also going to be huge. I don't know how they'll compare to saltwater desalination, but they're going to be big. So
it's a lot lower than saltwater, but it's still significant.
It's just one more issue that we're going to have to consider.
So now looking at a project that's conceptual for within Marin, this would be a raw water augmentation. So what I called IPR light, this would be treating the water similar to the project from before, but now taking it to Bontempi, which has a smaller area, a smaller volume. So it'd be not as much dilution. And then the water would then be put through our Bontempi treatment plant. So that's how it follows the raw water augmentation. This one similarly is also expensive. It's a little bit lower in the amount of conveyance needed to get it out. So we're not going to Kent, we're going to Bontempi instead. But there would be a higher probably capital cost associated with the treatment. And then moving into treated water augmentation, this is a conceptual project with CMSA. So you'll see this is kind of an overview, a bird's eye view of the CMSA plant. And you can't see any of the markers in there, but basically this is showing a connection to our distribution system. And so this would be a project in which we'd have CMSA would upgrade their facilities to include advanced water purification to meet all the requirements that we just discussed. And this is meeting the draft requirements that are not approved yet. And so for right now, what we're estimating based on the study with Carollo about a year ago, it was about 125 million. And we've incorporated kind of that continuous intermittent range, just considering that these are still membranes and how that may impact the overall cost per acre foot. And this project, it also would only be using water from CMSA. So it's a little bit lower in the amount of water that we would take from them. So 4 MGD.
Just a quick question. Is that the minimum cost? Are there incremental steps we can take without having to the full blown effort here?
For treated water augmentation?
Can you do a smaller version?
The same study did look at a smaller volume, but it's the capital and operating are not linear with volume. So generally the higher the volume you can muster, the better your unit costs are going to be.
Economies of scale.
Yeah. We looked at a 2 MGD plant and it wasn't, you might as well go for if you can get more volume. It wasn't much different in the capital. And then looking now across, I was going to say across California, but that didn't work. So looking across kind of the country and then also beyond. So what DPR projects are being planned and actually operational. And so we've pulled together kind of a list that we've heard of in the industry. There's a plant in Namibia that's actually been operating since 1968. That's has different criteria than we would see in California or the US.
Operating is an interesting choice of words.
Yeah. And so then there's also El Paso is working on a project for a DPR treated water augmentation that they will blend with some groundwater, some saline groundwater. And that right now is still in the kind of final design, and they're anticipating construction starting next year.
Although you should point out, they're already desaling their groundwater in
yes.
El Paso. So
Right.
they're already doing that. And so it's kind of it fits in with the way they're rolling.
Right.
They're already spending a lot of money because the water is so salted up from ag use that it's undrinkable.
Mm-hmm.
I just want, as a kind of a point of note about this, is all really powerful information and a lot to think about. We keep switching between MGD and acre feet, and it's really hard to see the apples and the oranges.
Okay.
So maybe in the future we can pick one. I like acre feet. It kind of makes more sense to me visually, but just so that we can see the relative.
Yeah.
Keep in mind an acre foot per year is 1 MGD. And one acre foot per year is roughly equal to 1 MGD, give or take.
Yeah. Same with our billing. We've talked about it before, right? Let's have one unified language and lexicon.
Yeah, I'd say the El Paso project is the game changer, right? This is the first in the US of direct DPR into a pipe, and it's going to be interesting, and there's going to be a lot of testing and attention. So that one is going to be interesting to watch. I don't know if a field trip out there is as good as in Namibia, but
it is actually. I've been to other facilities in El Paso, and it's quite interesting what they're doing.
At some point, it could be interesting.
Yes, I would say it is justified. I mean, there's not a lot to see, but it's interesting to talk to them and their philosophy.
Lucy, just wanted to note that Singapore has probably been
That's a good
doing
point.
this for 20 years now, but they don't blend their treated water with their drinking water streams. They bottle it
Okay.
and sell it as new water. It's required drinking in all government meetings, official meetings.
Yeah, Singapore has the advantage of a very strong
Bring it
central
around.
government. They just say, we're going to do it.
So then stepping back, looking at kind of both pieces that we've talked about today with both the non-potable and the potable water, we wanted to bring together a table to look at kind of comparatively how much demand are we talking about, how much overall capital cost are we talking about, bringing some of the acre feet, cost per acre feet together. And you can see that it's expensive depending on how we operate the system. So with the DPR and the IPR, the options there, it really depends on continuous or intermittent. I think the focus really is how we can offset some of these costs in the long term and see if there's grant opportunities with some of the recycled water to pursue.
And as we reflect on these unit costs, as Director Schmidt noted, in terms of comparisons, the Sonoma water cost is about $1,400 an acre foot. And that's before our pumping and chemical additions and things like that.
So reflecting on kind of all the options that we've talked about today, recycled water is definitely, we can pursue expansions. There's just expenses that come with it. It's an expensive, capital intensive process to expand the recycled water system. And that's why often we discuss monitoring grants and pursuing grants in order to offset some of those capital expenditures. And then
The problem is, of course, everyone's doing that.
and so then also monitoring industry regulations and industry happenings. So seeing how these other agencies move their projects forward, see if there's any changes in the criteria or the regulations that occur over time, and making sure that we stay up to date with the trends and the technology. And then also considering what are the multi-benefit opportunities with the sewage agencies in our district, as they nutrient regulations move forward. Irrigation sometimes is a better option for nutrient removal rather than IPR or DPR, where the concentrate then goes out to the bay. And then continuing to really incorporate all of this information into our strategic water supply roadmap moving forward. So,
Yeah, Lucy mentioned I gave a presentation and Director Cush was able to attend as well at CMSA's board meeting the other night. Really in response to the understandable questions that come from sanitary agencies of, we have water here, why aren't you more interested? And it was a very good, I thought, question and answers to help share some of the, real complexities as we think about recycled water, that it's not that we aren't interested, we're committed to it. There's just challenges, and we're looking at all possible options through a lot of different lenses. So I think it was good, and I think they understood and better appreciated, that it's not just a no-brainer to go and grab their water as part of our water supply projects.
Well, I think it's important to point out what the problems are with their water, though. They have huge infiltration of salt water into their system. So their total dissolved solids, the salt level in their water, is 4 times higher than it is in Las Colinas, 4 or 5 times because of this. Now, I got into more about that, and he said that unfortunately they don't control their own sewers, CSMA. They're the treatment. So the sewers are somebody else's, SD1, and getting them fired up to take the salt out is very difficult. So there's a lot of issues with CMSA, not the least of which is, where are you going to put Ellis? That site is pretty tight. Doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just tight. So there's a lot of administrative issues at CSMA. And, the Country Mart shopping center, the one right down here on Sir Francis Drake, the water district forced them to dual plumb. And that has got to be what, 30 years ago? 20 years ago? 20, longer than that, before I was on the board. So 30 years ago. And with the idea we would supply water from CMSA. And then it was realized that the water was too salty to be able to use directly. So you can't do the Las Galinas approach that we're doing down there at CSMA because of the salt. So you have to put it in a salt reduction at CSMA. And that's been the stumbling block. Meanwhile, the owners of Country Mart are, still whining, to me at least, about the cost of that dual plumbing that they never got to use.
I think the
Questions?
only thing I would just add, so we had talked about pursuing grants, but we've also explored, as Chair Russell noted, private public partnerships, and most notably, I think, with the ranch radio.
Well, Peacock and Meadow
Peacock
Club.
Gap and of course the Skywalker. Was it Skywalker or?
Oh, yeah. It was Grady Ranch.
Grady
Yeah.
Ranch, yeah.
Never got the Skywalker. It was just the first one that he wanted, but yeah, but also a Meadow Club. I mean, we're talking with them and trying to work out with them to get a good source of water where they don't pull off of the system. What's interesting about golf courses is they're more worried about not getting water than they are about other things, like even their PR, I think. So they're more worried about a reliable source of water than they are the cost or anything else. So they're looking, and hopefully they'll come up with a solution. Okay. Any more questions? Go ahead. Have at it.
More of a comment, and I think Director Smith said it much more eloquently than I did about the cost of resiliency or insurance built into the water supply piece. At $3,500 an acre foot, as the least expensive option of all these, still has some value that I think we're not capturing in terms of resiliency or redundancy in the system, especially when we look to when we're into a drought period. We really need to find other options that could potentially be more expensive down the road. Will this help reduce or buffer our costs heading into that? So it'd be good to see. I know it's hard to actually put a price to that, but at least have scoring when we look at more of these water supply sources as something that would benefit in those categories. So, and also very happy to hear about the public-private partnership piece to explore, because if a customer comes with a desire to spend the money, then let's sit down and talk. Great. Thank you. That was it.
Really thought-provoking presentation. There's so much to be, I think, digested here. And I think overarchingly, it's pretty obvious that the landscape of recycled water is dramatically shifting. And with technologies that, and regulations with DPR and so forth, moving into a different space. And I think it's tricky for us, I think, to figure out, at least maybe just for me, to figure out where do we invest. I mean, when it comes down to it, what is a primary guiding light, at least for me, and I think for all of us, is our cost per acre foot. I mean, we're delivering water. What is the most cost-effective way to do that? And these costs are shifting with DPR being, with clarity coming around regulations. This will will probably drive innovation. It should. It's what we typically tend to see. At what point do we invest? I think there's a competition between, do we invest in distribution of recycled water versus DPR? I don't know what the right thing to do there is, and maybe it's both. But I think that needs to be given some thought, so we don't end up with stranded investments that basically down the road are cost ineffective to operate, and we invested maybe not in the right place. I appreciate that we can offset a lot of the costs we've been looking at. The big unknown is grants. How much money could we bring in to take that, the CMSA project from 34, cut it down in half, and we get down to something close-ish to our cost with Sonoma Water. But do those grants compete with other of our strategic water supply assessment projects? In which case, we have to think about, again, we have to put them up against those projects. If there's a slew of funding that comes from, it often does when you have new clarification around regulations, and suddenly, the state governments and federal governments want to see investment, they're suddenly become granting programs that are available for a short time. And maybe there's a window that happens very narrowly to invest in DPR, and it's only for DPR projects. So they don't compete with our strategic water supply assessment projects. So figuring out what real opportunity is there with grant programs that don't compete with our other strategic water supply assessment projects. I just also want to make it kind of a caution note around the strict regulation of water quality. I mean, from these agencies, that have the job to figure out what is actually safe for human consumption and for the environment is a place to err on caution. And, we thought asbestos at one point was a really great substance to use for fire protection. And we learned things that we didn't know. And hence now it's a problem. And it's a hard thing to get out of our system. Putting water into our environment that may have, forever chemicals that we now can't get back out of the system. These are things that we should be doing carefully. So not to say that we shouldn't be doing these things and pursuing these things, but I think we need to be thoughtful about how we invest, what's most cost effective, and recognizing right now we have phenomenally good water quality because of the health of our watershed. And I wouldn't want to see us make investments or that undermine that in any way.
That is exactly what I was saying with the philosophy of the health department. The highest quality source for the highest quality demand. So you keep them segregated. That is exactly what the health department is doing. And, you guys are probably all too young to remember this, but there was a drug called thalidomide that the Europeans allowed and the FDA did not allow it in America. It's the one that caused the birth deformations like short arms and things like that. It was god awful. And the FDA said, oh yeah, we didn't allow it. We're really good. Well, that's the problem you face all the time. And what you're going to find as a board is we're going to get to the unknown part, which is it's a risk. And you have to make the decision. Is it going to rain or it's not going to rain? That's the simple-minded side of it. But it's the same decisions. You have data that you can't know. It's going to happen. It's stochastic. It's going to happen when it happens. And you have to, as a board, we have to make a decision. That's the tricky part.
Well, I agree. We deal with risk and uncertainty all the time, but at the same time, that's why we look to, water quality, agencies to take that guesswork away from us, because we're not experts in human health water quality issues. So we fortunately get to look at criteria and requirements and trust in those rather than setting our own. But
until they change them.
And we can't know those things.
But that's my point. You're trusting lead would be a perfect example. When I went to school, the lead standard was higher than the lead levels at Flint. Flint water would have been allowable.
Yeah.
And now it's not.
I think we're saying the same thing, which is that we know we need to be thoughtful about the changing understanding of water quality requirements and the intention to, of course, try to get it right. I think all agencies are trying to, and I think the caution around it today reflects a knowledge of that those things have changed over time, and we are learning about causal mechanisms between chemicals and human health that we never envisioned before. And so anyway, I mean, it's really important that this all goes to the point overarchingly, which is this space is changing quite rapidly, and how we invest needs to be thought out. And I'm glad we're looking at other agencies that are making these investments, and the more we can learn from their thought process, because I'm sure they probably had similar conversations to the one we're having today. I think that helps us not to invent the wheel here, but learn from others. So.
And I think I agree with what you're saying. I think the last part of it, though, is caution is foremost. In other words, engineering is doing the most with the least. That's a critical thing to understand. Anyone can do the most with the most. Doing the most with the least is a whole nother animal, especially when you have a moving set of standards. PFAs are a perfect example of this. I don't know. You monitor for them, but there's no standards. So what are you monitoring against? Do you find them? Yes. What does it mean? I don't know.
Are you good? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Paul and Lucy and Ben for the presentation and the reporting and the updates. I think it was great. I personally would like to take this from being a report out to an action plan and have some very clear next steps. You know, I have confidence that the state of California is thinking this through. I followed their recent science panel, which I think is moving in the right direction to move these along successfully. And I am less concerned about doing the most with the least. I'm much more concerned about doing the right thing for our community and being super thoughtful about it. And I believe that recycled water is one of the best environmentally thoughtful opportunities for us. That it is fulfilling in many ways the One Water concept. We have agencies willing to partner with us. And in order to make this an action plan, what would be helpful for me would be to have true feasibility studies work done as we go out for grants. I feel like there's a chicken and an egg going on here, that on the one hand, you know, we're not going to go forward unless we have grants. And on the other hand, we can't actually put forward really thoughtful approaches and studies to get those grants. And unless some of these are thought through. So if the SASM $4.6 million opportunity is thought through and ready, I would highly recommend that we aggressively go after grant money for that. It seems to be the most cost effective. And I'll bet we can reduce our cost, our per acre foot significantly if we get grant money for that, as well as some of the others. So I would like to see us have goals in the short, medium, and long term to start to implement recycled water more than we have now. And a $4 million implementation is a lot more achievable than a $125 million one, which may really get away from our other opportunities. But we should diversify our water supply opportunities, and I think this is one that is worth looking at. I two more questions, 2 more points. One brief one is that I gather we increased our recycled water fee charges per use significantly in the last rate setting, and I'd love to have at some point, and maybe you can just send it around, like how we came up with those numbers, because I think it may have knocked out the feasibility of recycled water for some of our potential customers. And so I'd like to better understand what our thought process is on the rate increase for that. And then Ben, I gather you went to a recycled conference in Southern California. I'd love any knowledge you can share with us about what you learned, and that might be applicable for us would be great. And I appreciate you going down and doing that.
Yeah, most of what I learned was on the slides. It was really, my interest was understanding the state of the regulations and maybe more so what folks are actually doing in really the space of DPR. And generally, the conclusion is really focused on IPR, groundwater storage and retrieval, primarily if you have groundwater, and then some of these other kind of longer term DPR considerations. But yeah, that it's going to move quickly. The Colorado River is the game changer, it seems, in Southern California, and people are moving forward in ways they never had before. But yeah, it's a decadal long transition that's going to be taking place, and we're going to benefit quite a bit from watching and learning as it happens.
It's important to remember we're spending the public's money, and to have a nonchalant attitude towards cost effectiveness just doesn't work. You've got to look at it from an engineering standpoint of doing the most with the least, because that's the job. You always want to spend the least amount of money to get the job done. Sure, you want to set the goal properly. That's correct. But you cannot be nonchalant about the money. The money is important.
If you're talking about me being nonchalant about the money, then you're talking to the wrong person.
Well, that's what you said. You said, you just threw out, I don't care about doing the most for the least. I care about meeting the goal or something like that.
Well, sometimes most for the least means that you run out of water. right? And we don't want to run out of water, which almost happened in 2021, or we may not have enough money to fund
those are-
hiring people. So
those aren't
sometimes when you
those
don't
aren't
increase
hooked together.
rates,
They aren't hooked
then
together.
you actually aren't really thoughtful about how you
No.
take care of the agency
A
and the community.
misassessment of the situation.
Maybe just a couple of more. It's hard to add much more to the richness of the discussion that we've had. But Paul, just on the technical side, we haven't discussed the possibilities of decentralized treatment. Ben knows I'm really interested in this. It's a topic that comes up more and more with respect to urban water planning. Options for moving away from large centralized infrastructure to much smaller, decentralized, facilities that, maybe even more, things that, may have more opportunity for even intermittent function. In Ben taught me this pretty cool term called scalping plants, which is taking water out of the sewer system and recycling it in a decentralized location for a very specific geography. Do we have any options for including more analysis of decentralized recycling water facilities here in Marin? Obviously this has to continue to build upon partnerships with our sewer agencies. I know the technical aspects of this are daunting, just like they are for everything else, but I really would like to put in a request for more evaluation of those options, given how hard everything else is.
Well, congratulations, you found the one hole in our presentation. But in our defense, I would say that the feasibility studies that we did cite with both CMSA, not so much the DPR one, but the one prior to that, and with SASM, and earlier on in the 2000s with Bauman Sheik, who you may know is sort of a godfather figure in terms of recycled water in California. And we did look at satellite treatment facilities, and in all of those studies, I would say without exception, they tend to be rather costly in terms of per acre foot. But I can certainly provide you more information on that.
I think there's a good chance over this next year, as the nutrient permit for San Francisco Bay starts to get developed, that the wastewater agencies, let's say CMSA, are going to be faced with a major capital upgrade need. And there's the potential that's not remote that they'd be able to do some kind of negotiation of, we can remove 30%. And maybe that's a fraction of what an upgrade at their treatment plant through subsidizing the funding of a recycled facility, potentially a scalping facility. If you think about it, Ross Valley, for example, you take out the water and treat it, put the solids back in the sewer. And if you have so irrigation is a way to deal with nutrients effectively, and it's also a water source. So I do think there's going to be some potential movement and interest to have the wastewater side, because of the nutrient regs, support the funding in addition to potential grants that could really shift the economics of how we're looking at recycling.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think having an action plan, or at least a process that we can, a framework from which to make decisions on moving forward, would be good. And especially with the regulations going to be due out finalized, plus these other regulations, maybe it makes sense to start looking at some sort of date in 24. We either have a recycled water symposium with everyone that's got a stake in the game here in the county, or some sort of ad hoc type committee that would be interested in constantly focusing on this from a regional perspective, not just Marin Water, so everyone's needs are voiced, and we could potentially identify some real solutions. So it'd be interesting to look at your thoughts on that, not for answer now, but just for 2024.
I also think that if you took a serious look at decentralization here, we have too much decentralization already. There are too many sewage treatment plants in Southern Marin. I think it's something like 13. And that was the purpose of CMSA, was to consolidate them into a plant that could be operated. If you look at SASM, you look at Sausalito, they've had some pretty rough rides with their water quality. And I think if you went to the regional board with the EPA, they would both say, you guys should be bringing them together to increase the level of operational skill. A larger plant has better operators, just mechanically. So there are many benefits. We already have it spread all over because of the way Marin developed.
Just one last comment, or for, at least for me, is just a blending of things that have been said here, which is seeing that list of all the times we've talked about this tells me that we've been talking about it, but we haven't come up with a plan. And I do think that it would be really helpful for us to, maybe Matt's suggestion of it, at some point in the coming year, have a very focused session where we bring in the right partners and other thought leaders so that we can, as we are making strategic investments in our future and our water supply, this is a possibility, undeniably. And I think, honestly, in 50 years from now, are we going to be doing DPR? And I think undeniably that DPR will become a much more common water management tool across, the globe, let alone California. But what do we do today? Because obviously the technology is still evolving, like I said. But I think it'd be really helpful for us to have a session where we intentionally come up with a near-term strategy where we're talking about what kinds of should we get together our best viable proposal, so that if there's a grant program that comes out of the federal government or the state, we're ready if we decide that that's really how we want to spend some time and invest. But having a clear plan, so that long list of plans that we already showed, maybe there's one that says, and that's the one that we have an actionable definition of what we're going to look to do in the near term, so that we can be guided what we do next.
Gold star for director. The second hole in our presentation today, we neglected to talk about some of the things that we have done. And we've been members of the North Bay Water Reuse Authority for some time now. And we have a project registered with that group. And you may know that group is a collection of regional agencies, basically the Sonoma Water customers, and a couple of others, from water on the water side and on the wastewater side, looking together to form a regional group to go apply for grants. And they've been somewhat successful in terms of getting grant funding for recycled water projects for the region. And the project that we currently have listed with them is the San Quentin project. So we are ready to Director Smith's comment about, hey, can we go get grants? We are actively looking in that arena for grants. So that'll be a USBR type grant from those folks. And in terms of feasibility studies, we have done actual feasibility studies that meet our own DWR requirements for feasibility studies. Those were grant funded feasibility studies, so they exist. So in terms of applying for further grants, we could certainly do that as well. Trying to avoid and tiptoe around the issue of applying for funds that may support other projects with higher water volumes that we're looking at.
Okay. Why don't we go to the public?
Yes, we have several. Mr. Phil Sauter, Larry Menikis, and Ed Jamison, please.
Thanks, as always, for the presentation. As Paul presented, our current recycled water distribution system consists of 25 miles of pipeline and delivers 700 acre-feet of recycled water to 358 customers. If my math is right, that's about 230 million gallons a year, or about 300 gallons per customer per day. Worth noting that we have residential customers in that usage range. The 2021 study looked at a phase 1 expansion that would be half the capacity we currently have, and phase 2 would be about 90% of what we have now. The cost of these two phases in the 2021 study was between $5,000 and $8,000 per acre foot. Today, we're seeing it's more like $7,000 to $10,000 per acre foot. And I'm guessing this is behind the comments I've been hearing that the cost of a purple pipe system is just too high to be a practical way to offset use of potable water for outdoor residential irrigation. I tried looking at the numbers a different way, but first I looked at the recycled water system map and compared it with a map of our super users. This is the recycled water map. The top is our current system, and the second two colors are the proposed expansion phases. And this is a map of our super users. The overlap isn't very great, but you can obviously, in phase 2 and phase 3, you can change those boundaries to include more residential users. A super user using 400 gallons a day is using a half an acre foot annually. So that super user, using Paul's numbers, would cost between $3,500 and $5,000 annually, or $300 to $325 a month, or $10 to $13 a day. That is 3 to 4 cents a gallon. And that's in line with, I think, our tier 3 and tier 4 rates. So I'm not seeing any red flags at these prices for recycled water. I don't think it's written anywhere that we can't charge for recycled water the cost of delivering it. And in Austin, Texas, they charge people for hooking up to the system. So as we look at the use of recycled water as a way to extend water supply, I'll suggest we move away from trying to get folks to drink it and look at it for using it for that half of our business, which is outdoors and where recycled water fits perfectly. The district would receive revenue from this recycled water during a drought. And most important, we would extend our supply of pristine potable water to last us through a 4-year drought. So in closing, I would like to say, let's think big about recycled water. It'll even with these expansions, it'll be 5% of our supply, and it fits in very nicely with the 50% of our demand that's used outdoors.
Thank you. Mr. Larry Menikis, please.
Yes, good morning, and I want to thank you for an excellent presentation and tremendous conversation here. Very timely, and I want to thank Director Kush for segueing into what I'm going to talk about, which is decentralization. You may have noticed in today's IJ, there's a very timely article by an incarcerated award-winning journalist on the aging infrastructure at San Quentin, and the water leakage, the plumbing, all of this being major problems. Is there any thought to speaking with Sacramento about San Quentin putting their own decentralized IPR or DPR or even desalination plant in there with the excess water, if money can be found, piped over to Peacock Gap? That would represent a savings of about 500 acre feet per year. And excess water that they produce could possibly be sold back to us. There's a lot of options. For example, we could supply DPR to them. They could then convert that to IPR for use for drinking, keep the DPR, the indirect potable reuse for toilets and such. It's just that there seems to be an opportunity here to work with the state to reimagine how San Quentin utilizes and captures their water. And it may not be very expensive because we're talking about a relatively small system. For example, on one industrial site, manufacturing site of wastewater treatment plants, San Quentin is using about 135,000 gallons per day. 150,000 gallon wastewater treatment plant, they suggest would cost with planning around 500,000 to 1.5 million. This would get it to the first point, which then could move the water into IPR or DPR. But it's something that seems like there's an opportunity here to get the state to partner with us and possibly to get Peacock Gap to partner with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Ed Jamison, please.
Yes, thanks. I just question whether it's realistic to assume continuous recycling operation at around $4,000 an acre foot for $8,000 an acre foot per year, suggesting an annual cost increase of around $30 million for insurance. That's a lot for our 100 million of total cost districts. That $30 million annual increase in costs would be for water, that would be spilled in 3 out of 4 years. Thanks.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And now we are going to adjourn and go to closed session.
And there are no speakers for closed session.
Okay. The closed session adjourned at 11:35 with no reportable action.